I'm Roy Lee Lindsay with the North Carolina Pork Council, and I want everyone to remember bacon makes everything better.
Welcome, everyone, to This Week in College Football with David Glenn, brought to you by our great friends at the North Carolina Pork Council. Thank you so much again for joining us this week. I'm Chris Edwards. Happy to be back with DG here in year 2 of our quickly growing North Carolina Sports Network. On this show in 2024, DG and I are mostly looking ahead at the upcoming week's college football matchups. We'll also discuss college football's biggest headlines and take a quick glance back with some of DG's expert analysis on the biggest games and developments from the previous week's schedule. David, now in his 38th year covering college football, both here in North Carolina and around the Atlantic Coast Conference. And DG, hard to believe we've come to the end of our regularly scheduled football shows here in 2024. The year has flown by. It's been great to be with you every week, and looking forward to chatting again here today.
It's great to be with you, Chris. You are the ultimate pro. There is nobody that I have enjoyed working with in this kind of a setting over my almost 4 decades now. So I appreciate your energy, your professionalism, your attention to detail. You really help make my job a lot easier than some of my job descriptions of the past.
A lot of fun. Let's dive right into it. We're going to get to the coaching changes at all of the FBS schools in our program. Of course, Blake Harrell has already succeeded Mike Houston at East Carolina. Now, as we record this, still some coaching searches ongoing at North Carolina, Appalachian State, Charlotte, and now at North Carolina A&T as well. But we first look ahead to this week's action, DG, starting with the ACC Championship game that's going to be in our backyard in Charlotte at Bank of America Stadium. This segment brought to you by our good friends at Atlantic Tire and Service, where DG and his family take all of their vehicles for routine maintenance, service needs, and a world-class selection of new tires. Atlantic Tire and Service, they're your one-stop tire and auto repair provider with highly trained technicians and a sales and support staff that are really second to none. They've grown to 6 Triangle area locations, 2 in Raleigh, 2 in Cary, 1 in Durham, and of course, 1 in Wake Forest. Learn more at AtlanticTireOnline.com. As we mentioned, ACC title game, number 18 Clemson. They're 9-3 against number 8 SMU. They're 11-1. This is Saturday night on ABC, 8 o'clock. SMU, a 2-point favorite to win the ACC championship in their first year in the league, DG.
Yeah, the most important aspect of this matchup, if you take the very broad, big picture ACC perspective, is that it would actually help the league if Clemson were to beat SMU in a really close game. Why do I say that? Because Clemson has one and only one very narrow path to the college football playoff. That is winning this game and making it as the ACC champion, period. Even Dabo Swinney has recognized this fact. Nobody's getting into this 12-team playoff format with 4 losses, which is what Clemson would have if the Tigers lose on Saturday night. SMU, on the other hand, obviously would make the playoff with a victory over Clemson as the ACC champion, but the Mustangs also would have a very good shot at an at-large bid to the playoff with a close loss to the Tigers. Their record would be 11-2, and their losses in this hypothetical scenario would be by a very narrow margin to a quality Clemson team that would at that point have 10 wins, and by a very narrow margin, 18-15 in reality, way back in early September, to a BYU squad that finished 10-2. And remember, that BYU loss came when the Mustangs were still starting Preston Stone at quarterback before their switch to Kevin Jennings, who ended up being 3rd-team All-ACC this year after really rejuvenating that SMU season. In terms of the matchup itself, although Clemson has won 7 of the last 9 ACC football championships under Dabo Swinney, and obviously SMU is the brand new guy in the ACC, there's nothing at all lopsided about this game in terms of the physical matchups. Remember, the Tigers have been in this title game only once in the past 3 years. So there's no real experience advantage there. And the Mustangs did win the American Athletic Conference Championship game just last year, with a lot of their current players contributing to that sensational season as well. So they have plenty of experience in these big games. While the Miami Hurricanes got most of the ACC headlines this season before stumbling down the stretch, mainly because of the quarterback Cam Ward and his excellence and their explosive offense, they got those headlines. These two teams, Clemson and SMU, have been by far the two most complete and well-balanced teams in the ACC. The Canes, as we all know by now, have not been consistently good on defense, whereas the Tigers and the Mustangs have been consistently good and even occasionally elite on both sides of the ball. Kevin Jennings of SMU and Cade Klubnik of Clemson, if we were to do QB power rankings, I think they'd be two of the ACC's 4 best quarterbacks this season, along with Cam Ward of Miami and Kyle McCord of Syracuse. Also in this game, Brashard Smith of SMU and Phil Maffa of Clemson were two of the ACC's best running backs this season, along with UNC's Omarion Hampton and a handful of others. Both of these teams are really good on defense. SMU is especially tough against the run. Clemson especially tough against the pass. My key to this game is definitely which team can run the ball better. I don't care how they run it, but if you can run it, you're maximizing your chance to win the ACC title. SMU has a very good offensive line, a great running back in Brashard Smith, who's a Miami transfer, and a dual threat quarterback in Kevin Jennings, who obviously can supplement your rushing attack with his legs. Clemson's defense is not quite as dominant as it has often been in the Dabo Swinney era. They're just not quite as scary in their front seven. Good, but not as elite as they have been. Clemson on the offensive side also has a really good offensive line, also has that great running back in Phil Maffa. And not everybody totally gets this part, but Clemson also has a really good dual threat quarterback in Cade Klubnik, who has had some bad moments, but actually ran for even more yards than Kevin Jennings of SMU did this season, which I think would surprise a lot of people and maybe help you win a bar better too. Bottom line here, I think there's a chance this game unfolds in a manner very much like Clemson's game last week against South Carolina, which went down to the wire at Death Valley in a low-scoring format before the Gamecocks pulled out that 17-14 victory. It might also end up like SMU's game earlier this season against that defensively outstanding Duke team, when it was 21-21 at the end of regulation, fairly low scoring by modern standards, before the Mustangs pulled out a 28-27 victory over the Blue Devils in overtime. As always, turnovers and big plays are going to matter a lot in this one, as our North Carolina Sports Network crew heads to Bank of America Stadium here in the Queen City on Saturday night.
Should be a lot of fun. Stay with us. We'll have more of This Week in College Football with David Glenn, presented by the North Carolina Port Council, coming up in just a moment right here on the North Carolina Sports Network.
In sports, we talk a lot about impact players who make a positive difference. When it comes to our state's economy, the North Carolina pork industry is a true MVP. Each year, the pork industry plays an important role in supporting rural communities across our state. It contributes more than $10 billion a year to the North Carolina economy and supports more than 44,000 jobs. Learn more about their positive impact at ncpork.org. The North Carolina Pork Council, the foundational partner of the North Carolina Sports Network. Michael Berard, Managing Director Investments with the Founders Group at Stifel, works with a select group of high net worth individuals and institutions to develop and implement investment plans tailored to their specific objectives and risk tolerances. If you are interested in highly personalized, well-researched guidance and outstanding personal service, you can contact Michael at 984-364-2002. That's 984-364-2002. Stifel Nicholas & Company Incorporated, member SIPC and NYSE.
Welcome back to This Week in College Football with David Glenn, presented by the North Carolina Port Council. Diving right into our ACC and National Week 15 look ahead, brought to you by our good friends at XL Moving and Storage, a family-owned Allied Van Lines partner here in North Carolina with 25 years of award-winning experience that can help you with your move to North Carolina, within North Carolina, or away from North Carolina, even internationally, while also assisting with all of your storage needs. Learn more at excelms.com. That's XL Moving and Storage. Hard to believe, but only 6 games on the entire Week 15 schedule at the FBS level, and they're all conference championship games. We'll tackle 2 more of those games here in just a moment. But a reminder, the newly expanded 12-team college football playoff does save spots for the 5 highest-ranked conference champions, with 4 of those conference champions getting the first-round buys. Then the College Football Playoff Committee will fill out the field with the 7 at-large selections based on the resumes of the teams involved in the league championship games. So pretty safe to assume that the champions of the ACC, Big 10, Big 12, SEC, Mountain West will be the 5 highest-ranked conference champions. Probably not much argument there. In the Big 12, 10-2 Iowa State taking on 10-2 Arizona State Saturday afternoon. Out of the Mountain West, 11-1 Boise State and 10-2 UNLV, a Friday night matchup there. And in the American Athletic Conference, it's 9-3 Tulane and 10-1 Army, also Friday night. Although the winner of that not really expected to make the playoff, even as a conference champion, because again, only the 5 highest-ranked conference champions guaranteed to get to the new college football playoff. All right, so if you got all that, we're going to move on. The 2 highest-profile conference championship games, all 4 teams expected to make the playoff because even the losers of the game have built a good enough resume to get those at-large bids like we hear about in March for the basketball tournament. So, DG, a lot to break down, a lot to unpack, but let's talk about the games on the field. The Southeastern Conference, number 5 Georgia, 10-2, number 2 Texas, the Longhorns 11-1, their first year in the SEC. This is Saturday at 4 on ABC. Texas, a 2-point favorite, and Atlanta to win the SEC title.
Yeah, this one is a rematch of a regular season game, unlike that SMU-Clemson matchup. And in this one, Georgia, remember, went to Austin, Texas, and handed the Longhorns their only defeat of the entire regular season. The final score was a bit lopsided, 30-15 in favor of the Bulldogs. But I watched that game, and the play at the line of scrimmage, the play among the skill position players was very even overall, with both defenses limiting both offenses. You could actually see a ton of NFL caliber talent on both of these teams, but it was a closer physical matchup than maybe that 30-15 Georgia victory margin indicates. The key to the first game was Georgia's ability to create turnovers. They recovered 3 fumbles and had 1 interception, often setting up the Bulldogs' offense with very short fields. It was extremely telling in that one that even though Georgia led the game 23-0 at halftime, all 5 of the Bulldogs' scoring drives in the first half were very short drives. The longest first half scoring drive for the Dogs was only 34 yards. And both of their first half touchdowns against Texas in that one came after the Longhorns offense had turned the ball over deep in their own territory. Now, looking ahead to this Saturday afternoon, there's going to be an extraordinary amount of pressure on both quarterbacks, Carson Beck of Georgia and Quinn Ewers of Texas. And I mean physical pressure from the defensive line and linebackers, but also emotional pressure because they know that the defenses are better than the offenses, generally speaking, in this game. Whichever of those 2 quarterbacks has the better game is probably going to lead his team to victory. The number 1 offensive star of the first Georgia-Texas game was Bulldogs running back Trevor Etienne. Football fans know that last name. Trevor is the younger brother of former Clemson star turned NFL star Travis Etienne. Trevor Etienne had 19 carries for 87 yards and 3 touchdowns in Austin earlier this year, but he's been dealing with a really bad rib injury lately, and the Bulldogs' new number 1 tailback, Nate Frazier, is a really talented guy, but he's also a true freshman. So that may be a little scary going against a really tough Texas defense that picked off Carson Beck 3 times the first time these two teams got together. Meanwhile, Texas could not run the ball a lick against Georgia last time, maybe in part because the Longhorns were in catch-up mode for almost all of that game because of the large early deficit. The Bulldogs defense, by the way, also had 7 quarterback sacks last time against Quinn Ewers and his backup Arch Manning. Again, maybe in part because the Longhorns were so often in obvious passing situations. That's a little harder to tell. The bottom line here is that I think these are 2 of the half dozen or so best teams in America. There's not much difference between them. So it'll probably once again come down to turnovers, big plays, and the performance of those 2 veteran quarterbacks, Carson Beck and Quinn Ewers, who are both, by the way, considered middle round picks in next year's NFL draft at this point, but maybe could improve that stock if they can play well and lead their team to an SEC title against either of those elite defenses on Saturday afternoon in Atlanta.
Let's talk about the Big Ten title game now, the expanded Big Ten, a newcomer there, Oregon. They're 12-0, number 1 in the country, taking on number 3 Penn State. The Nittany Lions are 11-1. This is Saturday night at 8 o'clock on CBS. Oregon, a 3-point favorite in Indianapolis at Lucas Oil Stadium.
Yeah, how's this for an interesting theme? You're an astute veteran of this stuff, so you probably already noticed it, but you were kind enough to leave it to me to point out. Like SMU in the ACC title game and like Texas in the SEC title game, Oregon is trying to capture a conference championship during its first season in its new league, and they're trying to do so at the expense of the traditional powerhouse or one of the traditional powerhouses of that league. So that's a running theme in all 3 of these games that we've broken down so far. The Ducks have made the biggest splash of any of these newcomers in any of these leagues this season. Coach Dan Lanning's group is the only remaining undefeated team in the entire FBS ranks. That is not easy to do. And of course, right now, that comes with the number 1 national ranking. That gives them wiggle room if the Ducks were to lose this game. Oregon, remember, beat a big-time Ohio State squad that finished the regular season with a 10-2 record. The Ducks also handed 11-1 Boise State its only loss of the entire regular season. The Ducks dominated an Illinois team that finished 9-3 in the regular season. The Ducks beat Michigan in Ann Arbor by 3 touchdowns. And that Michigan team, remember, also ended up beating Ohio State. The only close game for the Ducks since their 32-31 nail-biter over Ohio State a couple months ago was a 16-13 win at Wisconsin, and the Ducks were missing a couple of their best players in that one. The challenge for Oregon this week is that it will be facing a Penn State team that, like Ohio State, plays some of the best defense in the entire country. The Ducks are led by 6th-year senior quarterback Dylan Gabriel. Folks may have seen him play 3 years at UCF, a couple years for the Oklahoma Sooners. And the Ducks with Gabriel have one of the most sophisticated and accurate passing attacks in the entire nation. Gabriel, who was just named first team All Big Ten at quarterback this week, is really good at getting rid of the ball quickly and throwing it very accurately. This number freaks me out. Dylan Gabriel completes almost 3/4 of his throws, almost 75% for the season. And he has 24 touchdown passes against only 6 interceptions. Penn State, of course, has an elite pass rusher in a guy named Abdul Carter, an absolute freak. An elite linebacker in Kobe King, elite defensive backs in Jalen Reed and A.J. Harris. So they're tough to move the ball on, tough to score on for sure. When Penn State has the ball, it will be up to their veteran quarterback, Drew Aller, and their All-American tight end, Tyler Warren, first-team All-American at that position on my ballot, to make the big plays, because the Nittany Lions have not been nearly as dominant on the offensive side of the ball this season. In fact, other than the Lions' very impressive win over that 9-3 Illinois team, you could argue, even at this late stage of the season, that Penn State's next best victories, other than the one against Illinois, were nail-biters over mediocre Minnesota and Southern Cal teams. So this game is by far the biggest challenge of the season for James Franklin's squad in my eyes. Final thought on this one, The temperature is expected to be in the mid-30s on Saturday night in Indianapolis. Why do I live in North Carolina and have for the last almost 4 decades? In part because I grew up in Pennsylvania, and it gets cold there a lot more often than it does here. 30 degrees. I've played, backyard football in 30-something degrees. It's not fun. You can't feel your fingers. That's hard for quarterbacks especially. I would guess that Oregon would want that retractable roof at Lucas Oil Stadium closed to allow for a more free-flowing offense and, just more modest temperatures. And I would guess that Penn State would want to keep that retractable roof open to make it bitterly freezing cold and maximize the chance of some kind of low-scoring defensive grinder of a game that might favor the Nittany Lions. That may be something to watch in the hours leading up to the kickoff of that game. Lucas Oil Stadium, again, has the retractable roof, so you don't automatically know the conditions this game will be played in. Sometimes they make an announcement earlier in the week so fans can prepare their attire to attend the game in person. But I haven't seen an announcement yet, and that'll be one more thing to watch beyond the football itself when those two great teams get together in Indianapolis.
The folks in the desert might be wondering about that too.
Yeah, right?
Let's take a break. We'll come back and have more of This Week in College Football with David Glenn, presented by the North Carolina Port Council right here on the North Carolina Sports Network. This segment brought to you by our great friends at Atlantic Tire and Service, where DG and his family take all of their vehicles for routine maintenance, service needs, and a world-class selection of new tires. Atlantic Tire and Service, your one-stop tire and auto repair provider with highly trained technicians and a sales and support staff that are second to none. They've grown to 6 Triangle area locations, 2 in Raleigh, 2 in Cary, 1 in Durham, and 1 in Wake Forest. You can learn more online at AtlanticTireOnline.com.
If you are anywhere near Wilmington, North Carolina, and looking for a little live music, a cold beer, a tangy slushie, a fun crowd, or just a taste of the good life at the beach, Jimmy's Bar in Wrightsville Beach is the place for you. Located on North Lumina Avenue, just 1 block from the sand and waves of the Atlantic Ocean, Jimmy's features a full bar with nightly beer and drink specials, and it hosts musical performers almost every day of the year. One more fun fact, Jimmy's annual Children's Bike Drive, which started in 2017, now distributes more than 1,000 bicycles and helmets per year to young people in the Wilmington area and beyond. Jimmy's Bar, your home away from home on Lumina Avenue in Wrightsville Beach.
Welcome back to This Week in College Football with David Glenn, presented by our friends at the North Carolina Port Council. DG, we're diving right into our coaches and quarterback segment, brought to you by
the Lawson Insurance Group in Raleigh is a family-owned business led by 3 actual brothers who happen to be huge sports fans. Ken Lawson, Miller Lawson, and Michael Lawson. I know these guys. I trust these guys, and I send these guys my own insurance business and that of my family. The next time you have insurance needs, I hope you'll do the same. The Lawson Insurance Group is known for its commitment to community and its dedication to ensuring.
All right, we're going to stick with the coaching topic this week because there's a lot of chaos that we got to break down here as we record the show today. At East Carolina, Blake Harrell has already succeeded Mike Houston. At North Carolina, Hall of Fame coach Mack Brown was fired in what's been kind of a back and forth over the last week or so. That happened before the Tar Heels lost their regular season finale to NC State. At Appalachian State, 5th-year head coach Sean Clark, a former Mountaineer player himself, was fired after the Mountaineers went 5-6 and missed the postseason for the second time in the last 3 years. At Charlotte, the 49ers have played in only 1 bowl game in the brief history of that program, and Coach Biff Poggi was let go after 2 seasons. Before we recorded the show, we found out North Carolina A&T also making a coaching change. So, DG, the question to you, if you're the athletic director at these schools in our state, would you have made these coaching changes? And if so, why?
Yeah, my short answer, Chris, is yes, and here is why. An athletic director has a lot of important roles, but one of the most important is finding the right person to lead your football program, which, of course, is an absolutely essential revenue producer at every FBS school especially. If you as the AD at any point stop believing that your current coach can either uphold an existing standard or reach, and we've all heard this phrase a lot, the proverbial next level that we often talk about in college sports, then you as the AD must make a coaching change. Similarly, and this is a little harder for folks to digest sometimes, because we live in a world where perception matters, whether we like it or not, whether we think it's fair or not. If your program reaches the point where maybe a huge chunk of your own ticket buying fan base, or maybe a growing percentage of high school prospects, their families, high school coaches, available transfers, etc., if large numbers of those folks stop believing that Coach so-and-so can maintain that standard at that school or can reach that next level at that school, then at the very least, you as the AD have to consider making a move because that perception matters. Fairness does matter. In my world, for sure, I value it intensely. But perception matters too, whether we like it or not. And anyone who does not accept that is living in la-la land, just this mythical alternative universe that simply does not exist in college sports in particular. So one by one, let's remember these things. At Charlotte, the so-called next level for a football coach at this stage, as Chris mentioned, relatively early stage of a program that's only a little bit more than a decade old. The next level at Charlotte is simply winning as many games as you lose, right? Through their 12 seasons of existence as an FBS program, the 49ers have had 3 head coaches. 11 of their 12 seasons were losing campaigns, and they've played in only that one bowl game Chris mentioned. In order, Brad Lambert lasted 6 seasons, Will Healy lasted almost 4 seasons, and now Biff Poggi lasted less than 2. He was actually fired with a couple games to go. Now, Poggi was a very successful high school coach, but there was nothing on his resume that suggested to me that he should have made anybody optimistic that he'd make a successful college coach. So when he went 6 and 16 with the 49ers over those less than 2 full seasons, at a time when Charlotte, remember, is desperately trying to raise money to improve what is a relatively tiny football stadium by FBS standards and relatively small facilities and other related budgets, it was definitely time for a change in the Queen City. At East Carolina, what's the next level for a football coach? I'd argue that at a minimum, it is to make the postseason far more often than you miss the postseason. Again, these next levels are not the same at every school. It varies a lot. What is the bar? What is the standard? What is the next level? At each school, it's unique. That's why we're discussing these things separately. You have to make the postseason far more often than you miss it at ECU. You might get the benefit of the doubt once, maybe twice, but not regularly. Mike Houston was only 27-38 overall at ECU, and he appeared to be on his way at midseason to falling short of a bowl invitation for what would have been the 4th time in his 6 years, and that is simply not going to fly in Greenville, North Carolina, period. Houston's defensive coordinator, Blake Harrell, had the interim part of his head coaching title removed when, after leading the Pirates on a 4-game winning streak after that 3-4 start under Mike Houston, which led to his midseason dismissal. So now Coach Harrell's first bowl trip as the man in charge later this month will represent an early step in the right direction for his brand new tenure as he tries to meet that standard in Greenville and maybe even try to get to the next level. In the long run, no matter what happens in that bowl game, of course, he will have to live up to the expectable and keep getting better standards that have been in place at ECU for a long time. At App State, as we have discussed all season, Chris and I, here on this program, the gridiron standard in Boone is very, very high. Just within the last 20 years, we don't even have to go back to ancient history. Just within the last 20 years, the Mountaineers went from winning back-to-back-to-back national championships under their legendary coach, Jerry Moore, in 2005, 2006, 2007 at the FCS level, to making a very smooth transition to the FBS ranks. Over this past decade, the only FBS programs with more victories than the Mountaineers are Alabama, Clemson, Georgia, Ohio State, Oklahoma, and Notre Dame. Maybe in the last couple of weeks, somebody else jumped onto that list, but that is insanely good company, obviously. Meanwhile, App State has had only 3 non-winning seasons. This context matters in a way it would not be in play at other schools. Only 3 non-winning seasons over the past 31 years. And one of those 3 was when Scott Satterfield was leading the jump from FCS to FBS. So it was understandable. That 31-year stretch with only 3 non-winning seasons is an incredible stretch of consistency. Although his overall record at his alma mater was pretty solid, Sean Clark, at 40-24. When Coach Clark missed the postseason 2 years ago and again this year when he went 5-6, that broke a 3-decade-plus streak of really consistent success and often amazing postseason performances. Remember, prior to Coach Clark, Scott Satterfield, now at Cincinnati, Eli Drinkwitz, now at Missouri, combined to win or share 4 consecutive Sun Belt Conference championships, not in the ancient past, but from 2016 to 2019. When you go from that just within the last decade to missing the postseason 2 out of 3 years, the coaching change in Boone became virtually inevitable, even though Coach Clark's average record there was a pretty solid, if you round the numbers, 8-5. That would work well at most schools. Certainly in this state, it just does not work well at a school where the standard has been set in a much, much higher place in football for a really long time. Finally, one highly unusual aspect of UNC's coaching change, of course, is that Mack Brown ultimately fell short of a Carolina football standard that who set? Mack Brown himself contributed at least as much as any coach in program history to where Carolina sets the bar for its gridiron program. Brown is the Tar Heels' winningest all-time coach. After all, he has led them to 6 straight bowl games, etc. That's one reason why so many Carolina football fans believe both that Brown should be celebrated for his countless contributions to Carolina football over 16 seasons if you add his 2 tenures together, but also that, nevertheless, the time was right for a coaching change in Chapel Hill for a wide range of reasons, including recruiting that we discussed here last time, especially when the coach's next birthday will be birthday number 74. Brown's successor, remember, inevitably will be asked to do what? To take UNC football to the next level. Yes. Since Brown left Chapel Hill to take the Texas job at the end of the Tar Heels' sensational 10-1 regular season back in 1997, 5 different men, Carl Torbush, John Bunning, Butch Davis, Larry Fedora, and Mack Brown Part 2, have been asked to take that program to the next plateau, however you want to define that, on a consistent basis. All 5 of those men ultimately fell short of that goal. Since 1997, Carolina has finished in the national top 25 only twice. They were number 15 under Larry Fedora when they went 11-3 and played in the ACC title game in 2015, and they finished number 18 in the national rankings under Mack Brown in 2020 when they finished 8-4. And Mack Brown, remember, also did lead them to another ACC title game a couple years later. Obviously, actually getting to this mythical next level at any of these schools is a lot easier said than done. But you have to keep the fans engaged. You have to sell tickets to football games. You have to offer high school prospects and major college transfers nowadays hope. Mm-hmm. And those things were lacking to various degrees at App State, at Charlotte, at East Carolina, and at North Carolina this season. Quick postscript. There are a couple other important things to note on the coaching carousel before we leave this topic, as we look forward to discussing the new hires at UNC and App State and Charlotte and ECU in more detail on upcoming shows. Right here in our backyard, a couple of shout-outs. Head coach Scott Abel left Davidson, which is an FCS program here, to take the job at Rice. That's an FBS program that competes in the American Athletic Conference against the likes of Charlotte and ECU. He had led the Wildcats of Davidson to 7 consecutive winning seasons which is not an easy task at that program. Another familiar face in these parts, former North Carolina Central head football coach Jerry Mack, who led the Eagles to 4 straight winning seasons and 3 MEAC championships from 2014 through 2017. Coach Mack just left an NFL assistant coaching position to take the top job at Kennesaw State. That program might not be on your radar, but it is an FBS program that plays in Conference USA. So congratulations to those guys. They're both getting their first opportunity to lead a program at the top level of college football after many, many years of working their way up the coaching ladder. So best wishes to them as we wait for some other in-state vacancies to be filled.
All right, let's take our final timeout. We'll come back and have more of This Week in College Football with David Glenn, presented by the North Carolina Port Council, right here on the North Carolina Sports Network.
The Lawson Insurance Group in Raleigh is a family-owned business led by 3 actual brothers who happen to be huge sports fans: Ken Lawson, Miller Lawson, and Michael Lawson. I know these guys, I trust these guys, and I send these guys my own insurance business and that of my family. The next time you have insurance needs, I hope you'll do the same. The Lawson Insurance Group is known for its commitment to community and its dedication to ensuring that North Carolinians and their businesses are prepared for life's inevitable challenges, with the reminder that as a high street insurance partner, Lawson Insurance Group offers local expertise and support that, combined with High Street's extensive national resources, means more choice and support for you as their client. To learn more, search Lawson Insurance Group online. The Lawson Insurance website will be the first link that pops up. Whether you are moving locally, nationally, or even internationally, and whether you're a residential or commercial customer, please consider our friends at XL Moving and Storage, an award-winning Allied Van Lines agent with offices in Greensboro and Raleigh. Thanks to their 25 years of experience helping North Carolinians all across the state with their moving and storage needs, XL has become the trusted hometown North Carolina moving services company. Our good friends Jim Dorsett and Jody Hatley, along with their hardworking staff, offer customized, tailored relocation and storage solutions to the people of North Carolina and beyond. Visit them online today at xlms.com. That's EXCELMS.com.
Welcome back to This Week in College Football with David Glenn, presented by the North Carolina Port Council. And last but not least, in our final segment today, we bring you our college football postseason snapshot.
If you are anywhere near Wilmington, North Carolina, and looking for a little live music, a cold beer, longest running restaurant in New Hanover County, that's since 1947. And it recently was rented. If you are anywhere near Wilmington, North Carolina, and looking for a little live music, a cold beer, a Tanksville Beach is the longest running restaurant in New Hanover County. That's since.
Well, our state does not have a team in the FCS postseason bracket or the Division III playoffs, DG, and both Lenoir-Rhyne and Wingate have been eliminated from the Division II playoffs. So we finished today with one question about the Atlantic Coast Conference and their place in the expanded version of the college football playoff, and one question about the North Carolina Sports Network's annual Best College Football Season in North Carolina honor, which you've been writing about on your various platforms since the early 1990s. Okay, among our 33 NCAA football programs here in North Carolina, DG, only 3 are still playing. Duke, Carolina, NC State, all headed to bowl games later this month. And I know you usually wait till after the postseason to announce our best college football season in North Carolina honoree, but with only a few games left to be played, are you ready to make the announcement here today, DG?
I think we are, but okay. let me first underline the extremely humbling starting point on this topic. You gave a pretty good overview there, and it does include 4 of our state's FBS programs, which get the most scrutiny, have fired their head coaches, so that's a bad sign. Another finished 6-6, another had a losing record, and only one had a great record. So that's a really humbling starting point. as we break down the field, so to speak. As you said, we were not very well represented in the postseason. This is not a pretty picture overall. However, there are several teams worth celebrating, and I wrote about them earlier this week at ncsportsnetwork.com, starting with the Duke Blue Devils. 9-3 right now, and if the Devils can get a bowl victory, they would not only get to the elusive 10-win plateau, obviously, they would also end up almost certainly ranked in the national top 25. Now, for perspective on that, Duke football has had only one 10-win season in the entire history of its program, and they've had only one top 25 finish in the last 60-plus years, 60-plus years. So if the first-year coach, Manny Diaz, can achieve either the 10-win plateau or maybe both of those things, 10 wins, and if he gets to 10, he's going to end up in the national top 25. The Devils are an absolute no-brainer to capture our 2024 best college football season in North Carolina honor. For those new to that honor, we're not claiming it's automatically the best team. Sometimes a Division II team wins this honor. We don't believe they would beat the FBS teams necessarily, but we celebrate the best season, which could come at any level of college football. Again, we just don't expect, if it's a Division III team, that they can actually head-to-head beat everybody else in this great state of ours. Given the lack of high-caliber competition for Duke this year, plus the inability, remember, the other contenders can't upgrade their resumes at this point because their seasons are over, I think the Devils probably would also deserve this hypothetical trophy, even if they lose their bowl game, to finish 9-4. In any event, Diaz and his staff deserve an enormous amount of credit. Importantly, for our purposes, the Blue Devils' 9-3 regular season record did include a sweep of the other members of the Big Four. They took out Carolina 21-20. We were at that game in Durham. The Devils beat State 29-19 in Raleigh. They beat Wake 23-17 in Winston-Salem. And those sorts of accomplishments against your in-state competition not only always serve as resume boosters, but they often provide kind of tiebreakers of sorts in our annual best season contest, because after all, it's a state of North Carolina contest. And if you can beat all of your in-state rivals, that's an enormous step in the right direction. Also, I want to point out at Duke, they were playing with a first-year starter at quarterback, the Texas transfer Malik Murphy. It is not easy to go 9-3 with a starting quarterback. I think he had started 2 games at Texas, but he had never been a full-time starter at the college level. When UNC and NC State ended up starting first-time starters at the most important position on the field, they both struggled to 6-6 records. Duke, using a different formula, did have a first-year starter at quarterback, but still ended up 9-3. That's not easy, and it's one more reason the Blue Devils deserve this honor. As we've said all season long, too, among the 17 football teams in the newly expanded ACC, no single unit in any phase of the game. I love watching video, and these guys are insanely well coached. No unit prepared and executed game plans more efficiently than the Blue Devils defense. Their coordinator, Jonathan Patke, and his unit allowed only 22 points per game. That is third best in the ACC. Guess what? The only 2 teams that played better defense are in the ACC title game, SMU and Clemson. Blue Devils also ranked number 1 in passing defense. Their opponents threw for fewer than 200 yards per game. That is an incredibly low number in the modern era. And their opponents threw for only 15 touchdowns against 12 interceptions. More great numbers that underline the amazing nature of the team Duke put together on defense this year, but also that 9-3, maybe 10-3 record that will allow us to crown Coach Diaz and his Blue Devils as the squad that had the best season in North Carolina this year.
All right, DG, as we wrap up, the Atlantic Coast Conference has been playing that disrespect card in both football and men's basketball in recent years. How do you think the candidacies of SMU, Clemson, and Miami should be viewed by the College Football Playoff Committee after these conference championship games? And kind of a second part to this, do you think there's a chance the ACC ends up with only one team in this expanded version of the college football playoff?
Hey, quick side note. The ACC is going to run out of disrespect cards in men's basketball unless they start winning some games.
Yes.
They're in the midst of being embarrassed in the ACC SEC Challenge, and the early returns, and everybody knows how much I love ACC basketball. The early returns suggest that it's not just some kind of narrative suggesting the ACC is down, the mean people who write headlines and articles. No, the evidence suggests that ACC basketball is down. So the crying should stop right there. To answer your question, yes, I do think on the football side that there is a chance that the ACC gets only one team into the playoff, and that would be, no doubt about it, another step backward for the league's football reputation. However, as I outlined earlier, if Clemson beats SMU in a close game, I think there is a very good chance that both the Tigers get in as the ACC champion, of course, but that the Mustangs also in that hypothetical would get into the playoff for the reasons I explained earlier. And if you have two playoff participants, that would at least be a respectable representation for the ACC. The more interesting debate to me, I think, has already started brewing, and that happened when ACC Commissioner Jim Phillips and some of the league's head coaches saw that 9-3 Alabama was ranked ahead of 10-2 Miami in this week's college football playoff committee rankings. The Crimson Tide came in at number 11, and the Hurricanes came in at number 12. And obviously, neither team has any games left to play between now and the final committee rankings. So if the dominoes fall in a certain way, the Tide would be the football version of the last team in to this new playoff, and the Canes would become the first team out. The philosophical question to me boils down to this, and it's entirely a matter of opinion. I'm not going to tell anybody I'm automatically right, you're automatically wrong. It depends on what you value most. And the question could be posed this way. Under what circumstances do you elevate a team with a lesser record, here 9-3 Alabama, over a team that not only has a better record, here 10-2 Miami, but also has much easier to explain losses? Here's what I mean. On the one hand, and for the SEC fans out there, I want you to know I am not blind to this. I am going to underline it myself. It is absolutely indisputable that the Crimson Tide has better wins than the Hurricanes do this year. You could even argue that Alabama has 4 wins that are better than Miami's best win. Determine for yourself. Alabama won 41-34 over a Georgia team that finished 10-2. That's a heck of a win. They won 27-25 over a South Carolina team that finished 9-3 and just beat Clemson. That's a heck of a win. They won 34-zip on the road at a Missouri team that finished 9-3. On the road, shutout of a top 25 team. That's an impressive win. They also won 42-13, also on the road at an LSU squad that finished 8-4. There is no doubt in my mind those are 4 outstanding victories for the Alabama Crimson Tide, especially considering the dominance of those 2 victories on the road. Miami's best wins, for comparison, are 53-31 dominant over 9-3 Duke. That was in Coral Gables. 52-45 at an 8-4 Louisville team. That's a quality win in my eyes. And then remember, the Canes did go to Florida of the SEC and absolutely annihilate the Gators 41-17 way back early in the season. That last one is certainly a dominant win for the Canes on the road at the expense of the Southeastern Conference. Overall, though, when you examine best wins, I don't think we could find anybody that would not say advantage Alabama. Again, on the best wins side of the ledger, and it's not even close. But the number of losses must matter in any rational analysis of this stuff, and the details of those losses have to matter too. And this is where Miami's argument becomes a lot better. This is where the analysis becomes advantage Hurricanes. First, the regular season is only 12 games long in football, right? And Alabama lost 3 times. That's 1/4 of the time. The Crips, there's a reason no 2-loss team was invited to the 4-team version of the playoff, right? If you only play 12 and you lose 2, there are probably 4 teams with better resumes. I do not think that we will just, as a rule of thumb, exclude all 3-loss teams from the 12-team version of the playoffs. Obviously, if Clemson beats SMU, Clemson would get in as the 10-3 ACC champion. So we're going to see 3 lost teams in this new format, no doubt about it. But the Crimson Tide were only 5-3 in SEC play. So you're barely over 500 in your own conference, and you finished 4th in your own conference standings. So again, that has to matter. Also, 2 of those 3 Alabama losses were to teams that finished 6-6. That is the definition of mediocrity. It'd be one thing if Alabama's 3 losses were all to Titans, to super heavyweights. No, 2 of the 3 were to teams that finished 6-6 and lost to some poor opponents along the way to 6-6. The Tide fell 40-35 to a Vandy team that finished 6-6, and the Tide fell 24-3 to 6-6 Oklahoma. That one was also on the road. Their other loss was much more understandable and respectable, 24-17, and they were on the road at a Tennessee squad that finished 10-2. No complaints there. But that loss to the Sooners was by 3 touchdowns. That has to matter. That loss to Vanderbilt was to a 6-6 team that lost to some really mediocre other opponents. That has to matter too. Miami, meanwhile, lost only 2 games, not 3. That has to matter. They lost both by a single possession. That should matter compared to getting your butt kicked by 3 touchdowns at Oklahoma. The Canes' losses were both by a single possession, both late in the 4th quarter, both on the road. That should also matter. And both to teams that finished with winning records. The Hurricanes' defeats were 42-38 at a Syracuse squad that finished 9-3 and had some nice wins over other top opponents. And the Canes also lost, remember, 28-23 at Georgia Tech, which did finish only 7-5, but also pushed those mighty Georgia Bulldogs to 8 overtimes in the ultimate close game. There's really no debate. Alabama has the better wins. There's also really no debate. Miami has fewer losses than the Tide, and the Canes overall had better losses than the Crimson Tide. Easier to understand losses. On the road by a single possession losses, and that is something that the committee has to value too. It looks like the people who matter have already made their choice. Again, with neither Alabama nor Miami have any games left to play, how could the Canes possibly leapfrog the Tide in the final committee rankings? I can't see how it could happen. But I'm not sure it's great news for college football if that 9-3 Alabama team gets in over a 10-2 Miami squad, if it comes down to those 2 for the final at-large spot. And whether you agree with me or not, it's certainly bad news for the Atlantic Coast Conference if that happens. On that item, everyone can agree.
Well, we're going to see what happens, and I'm sure we'll be back to break it all down later on in the postseason. Thanks, as always, to the North Carolina Port Council for being the founding partner of the North Carolina Sports Network. And we, of course, welcome Atlantic Tire and Service, now with 6 locations in the Triangle, as our newest sponsor. A quick reminder, DG and his staff posting daily articles at our fast-growing website, ncsportsnetwork.com, which has direct links on its homepage to this YouTube channel, the wide variety of places you can find on-demand audio and podcast of our show, The David Glenn Show, and all of our other offerings, and updates on year 2 of our Old North State tailgate and traveling sports circus, which had a great stop in Chapel Hill last week for the State Carolina game. We'll be in Charlotte for the ACC title game, and of course we'll be in Chapel Hill and in Raleigh on December 20th and 21st for the North Carolina High School Athletic Association's State Championship football games. And coming up this Sunday night, our 5th quarter show with Mike Waddell and Coach Jim Collins. They're going to talk about the state of all of the programs, ECU, Appalachian State, and Charlotte, and how they rank in the NIL era ahead of having to hire new head coaches. But for us, that's going to do it today. So for David Glenn, I'm Chris Edwards. Thanks for joining us for This Week in College Football right here on the North Carolina Sports Network.